Topic 2. The Development of European Civilization. History GPS. The development of European civilization until the end of medieval times. From about 800 BC, the ancient Greeks and ancient Romans developed their own civilizations, which were collectively known as the classical civilization. It is regarded as the origin of European civilization. In about 5th century AD, Europe entered medieval times. Civilization stagnated when the classical civilization ended in the 6th century AD. In the late medieval times, Europe was greatly influenced by Christianity and feudalism, and its civilization developed again. Topic Inquiry. How did the European civilization develop? What are its main characteristics? What legacy has it left us? 1. Spread of ancient civilizations. Since around 4000 BC, the Fertile Crescent civilization and the Nile River civilization had gradually spread to other places through wars and trade. This led to the rise of early European civilization in the Mediterranean region, including the Aegean Sea. 2. Classical European civilization. Between the 8th century BC and the 6th century AD, classical European civilization started in the Mediterranean region. It then spread in Europe, Asia, and Africa. It was an important stage of European civilization and had great contribution to the development of human civilization. 3. Medieval Europe. In AD 476, medieval times started. During the period, Christendom and feudal society took shape in Europe. Christianity and feudalism deeply influenced the life of Europeans at that time. Many cathedrals and castles they left were also famous cultural heritage today. Start of classical civilization, 8th century BC. Independent city-states emerged, and the ancient Greek civilization started. The city of Rome was founded, and the ancient Roman civilization started. Spread of the ancient Greek civilization, 5th century BC. As ancient Greece continued to expand, the ancient Greek civilization spread beyond the Greek peninsula. Spread of the ancient Roman civilization, 3rd century BC. As ancient Rome continued to expand its power, the ancient Roman civilization also extended across and beyond the Italian peninsula. Spread of Christianity, 4th century AD. In 380 AD, Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire. It then spread widely in Europe. Start of medieval times, AD 476. The Western Roman Empire ended. Europe entered medieval times. The influence of Christianity and feudalism kept increasing in Europe. History Starter. 1. The classical civilization is regarded as the origin of European civilization. It originated in the Mediterranean region around 800 BC. 2. It consists of the ancient Greek civilization and the ancient Roman civilization. They were created by ancient Greeks and Romans respectively. 3. The classical civilization is brilliant. For example, the well-planned cities of ancient Romans were a reference to urban planning later on. 4. Ancient Greek gods and myths have also become the themes of literary works, drama, and comics later on. 5. When Europe entered medieval times, wars were common. Classical civilization declined. 6. Faced with prolonged wars, medieval European kings and nobles built castles to protect themselves. They also gave land to their subordinates in exchange for military support. 7. At the same time, the number of European Christians boomed. The church became very powerful and wealthy. It helped preserve ancient civilization in times of war. 8. Medieval civilization is also significant to human civilization. For example, today's universities were first found in medieval times. Guiding questions. How do historians distinguish ancient times and medieval times? When and how did European classical civilization emerge? Why were there different political systems in ancient Greece and ancient Rome? A. Introduction to classical civilization. 1. Division of periods in European history, ancient times and medieval times. Historians divide European history into different periods. The period 4000 BC to AD 1453 was divided into ancient times and medieval times based on when the Western Roman Empire fell. Development of human history. Evolution of civilization. Historians divide European history into ancient times and medieval times, based on when the Western Roman Empire fell. Ancient times of Europe. Started around 4000 BC, first half of this chapter. Early European civilization, around 3000 BC to 1100 BC. Classical European civilization, around 8th century BC to 6th century AD. Ancient Greek civilization, started around 800 BC. Ancient Roman civilization, started in 753 BC. Medieval times of Europe, started in AD 476, second half of this chapter. Medieval European civilization, around 9th to 15th centuries AD. Ancient times of Europe started around 4000 BC. Around 800 BC, classical civilization rose in the Mediterranean region. It was regarded as the origin of European civilization. In AD 476, the Western Roman Empire fell. Ancient times ended. Europe entered medieval times, also known as the Middle Ages. Historians subdivide this period into two parts, namely the early medieval times, AD 476 to 800, and the late medieval times, AD 800 to 1453. 2. Rise of classical civilization. A. Early European civilization. The Aegean region, Eastern Mediterranean Sea, was close to the Fertile Crescent civilization and the Nile Valley civilization. It was influenced by these two advanced civilizations. Minoan civilization, around 3000 BC to 1450 BC. Around 3000 BC, the Minoans started the Minoan civilization on the island of Crete. They had advanced skills in architecture and pottery. The influence of this civilization spread to the Greek peninsula and neighboring islands. See source 2.3 on page 83. Mycenaean civilization, around 1450 BC to 1100 BC. Around 1450 BC, the Mycenaeans conquered Crete and many territories on the Greek peninsula. They learned from the Minoan civilization and developed their own civilization. They were famous for their skills in shipbuilding and metalwork. Study source 2.1 to learn more about the Aegean civilization. The Minoans liked art, left, and the Mycenaeans were good soldiers, right. Their civilizations were also called Aegean civilization. B. Birth of classical civilization. The Mycenaean civilization went into decline in 1200 BC. Around 1100 BC, the Greek peninsula entered its Dark Ages. In the 8th century BC, the ancient Greeks absorbed the Aegean civilization, while the ancient Romans learned from the ancient Greeks. Both developed their own civilizations later on. They were known as the ancient Greco-Roman civilization, or classical civilization. The classical civilization continued until the 6th century AD. Although it happened between ancient times to medieval times, we can still find its impact and contribution to the world today. Study source 2.2 for a brief introduction to the ancient Greco-Roman civilization. 3. Ancient Greek civilization. Around 800 BC, the ancient Greeks built city-states and invented writing. The birth of the ancient Greek civilization ended the Dark Ages of the Greek peninsula. The political development of ancient Greece was unique. There were many independent city-states and they were ruled by different forms of government. A. Background to the political development in ancient Greece. 1. Geographical barriers. Ancient Greece was hilly. It included the Greek peninsula, Crete, the west coast of Asia Minor, and islands in the Aegean Sea, present-day Greece, Macedonia, and Turkey. As places were separated by sea and mountains, the Greeks set up independent city-states. Source 2.3 shows ancient Greek city-states, above, and remains of an ancient Greek city-state, right, on a mountain. 2. Cultural differences. The ancient Greek were made up of different tribes. They had different cultures. It was difficult to unite them and set up a unified government. They ruled themselves and developed different forms of government. 3. Social differences. Social differences also led to different forms of government. For example, a highly centralized government was needed in Sparta, so as to rule the large population of slaves. As for Athens, more people engaged in trade, and they wanted more power from nobles. This prompted the rise of democracy. History in depth. Spartan slaves. Formation of the Helot system. Since the 8th century BC, the Spartans had expanded outwards. The conquered people became their slaves, known as Helots. The population of slaves increased continuously with the expansion of Sparta, and they even outnumbered the Spartans. Life of slaves and slave revolts. Under the Helot system, slaves were at the bottom of the Spartan society. They were the property of the Spartans. Slaves had no right and freedom. They had to work for their owners and even follow them to battle. Due to the hard labor work and punishment, many Spartan slaves fled or rebelled. However, most slave rebellions were suppressed, as the Spartans had strong military power. B. Features of ancient Greek political development. 1. Coexistence of city-states. There were several hundred city-states of different sizes in ancient Greece. Each city-state included a city and the surrounding land. They were ruled by independent governments. Relations among these city-states were almost equal. Athens and Sparta were the two most representative city-states. Study source 2.4 for a comparison of Athens and Sparta in terms of location, government, ways of living, and things they were best known for. 2. Diverse forms of governance. According to the ancient Greek scholar Aristotle, ancient Greek city-states had three main forms of government. Monarchy, rule by kings. For example, Macedonia. Oligarchy, rule by a group of nobles. For example, Sparta. Democracy, rule by the people. For example, Athens. Under different forms of governance, the level of citizens' participation in politics varied. In ancient Greece, citizens were free adult men who were born in and lived in the city-states. They had the right to vote and be elected as officials. C. Rise and spread of the ancient Greek civilization. 1. The Classical Age. The rapid development of city-states brought the ancient Greek civilization into its golden age, the Classical Age, around the 5th to 4th centuries BC. Athens was a center of trade, learning, and art on the peninsula. Study source 2.5 to learn more about the Persian Wars. Athens led other city-states to defeat Persia in the Persian Wars, 499 BC to 449 BC. Its economy and culture developed significantly under the rule of Pericles in the post-war period. 2. Spread to conquered areas. During the Classical Age, the ancient Greeks set up colonies in the Black Sea and Mediterranean regions. The Macedonian king Alexander the Great further built up a large empire that covered Europe, Asia, and Africa. The ancient Greek civilization was thus widely spread in these conquered areas. D. Decline of the ancient Greek civilization. During the subsequent Hellenistic Age, 323 BC to 146 BC, the ancient Greek civilization still influenced the Mediterranean region and West and Central Asia. From the 3rd century BC, the ancient Romans started invading ancient Greece. They finally occupied the Greek peninsula in 146 BC. The peninsula was then mainly influenced by the ancient Roman civilization. The ancient Greek civilization declined. Source 2.6 shows the empire of Alexander the Great, 336 BC to 323 BC. Alexander encouraged his soldiers to marry local women in the conquered territories. This greatly promoted the spread of Greek civilization. 4. Ancient Roman civilization. In 753 BC, a Latin village developed into a city called Rome in central Italy. The people were known as Romans. The ancient Roman civilization began here. The Romans learned the ancient Greek civilization from their neighboring peoples. They also developed different political systems because of civil wars and foreign expansions. These were the great legacies of the ancient Roman civilization. As comics say. Main points of the comics. Do you think the story of the origin of Rome is true or imaginary? Why? Origin of Rome. 1. A long time ago, the city of Rome was built by the twin brothers Romulus and Remus. Their father was the god of war, Mars, and their grandfather was king of a city-state on the Italian peninsula. 2. One day, their grandfather was overthrown. The rebel leader ordered a servant to throw the twins into the Tiber. 3. The servant did not want to kill the twins. He put them in a basket. The twins were saved and fed by a she-wolf. Later, they were taken home and raised by a shepherd. 4. When the twins grew up, they killed the rebel leader. They decided to build a new city along the Tiber. 5. However, the twins quarreled about the site of the city. Romulus killed Remus accidentally. He built the city in 753 BC and named it Rome. People living in the city were known as Romans. A. Roman Republic, 509 BC to 27 BC. 1. End of monarchy. After the founding of Rome, the Romans were ruled by kings. In 509 BC, the Romans overthrew their cruel king and set up the Roman Republic. 2. The Republican system. The rulers of the Roman Republic were chosen by the Romans through election, not hereditary kings. The government was divided into executive and legislative branches. Executive. The 2 consuls were the highest officials. They were elected by all male citizens. The Senate would give advice to the consuls and appoint governors. Most senators were patricians and needed not be elected. Legislative. All male citizens could vote in elections for the legislative assemblies, including the elections for officials, and vote on bills suggested by the Senate. Source 2.7 shows an oil painting of a meeting of the Senate of the Roman Republic. The Senate could only hold meetings between sunrise and sunset. In the early years of the Republic, the consuls and senators only came from the patricians. Around 494 BC, the plebeians could elect tribunes as their representatives in the Senate. Starting from 342 BC, one of the consuls had to be a plebeian. These greatly increased the power of the plebeians. Source 2.8 shows the executive changes of the Roman Republic, 509 BC to 342 BC. 3. Expansion of the Republic and dictatorship of Julius Caesar. By the mid-2nd century BC, the Roman Republic had defeated Carthage and Macedonia. The victories in external wars allowed it to dominate the Mediterranean Sea, but also led to the rise of military leaders. In 60 BC, the general Julius Caesar controlled Rome and was elected consul in the following year. Under his leadership, Rome became more powerful and people's lives were improved. The Senate was jealous of Caesar's increasing military power and prestige. In 49 BC, it supported Pompey to start a civil war to overthrow Caesar. Finally, Caesar won the war. He held all the power and was elected dictator for life. Source 2.9 shows the territories of the Roman Republic in 146 BC, above. Between 58 BC and 50 BC, Caesar conquered Gaul, present-day France, Belgium, and Germany. He also set up his own army, below. B. Roman Empire, 27 BC to AD 476. 1. End of the Roman Republic. In 44 BC, Caesar was killed by the senators. His adopted son Octavian worked with Caesar's general Antony. They gained power and ruled the Roman Republic together. However, a civil war broke out between them in 31 BC. Antony was defeated and killed himself. Since then, Octavian became the sole ruler of the Roman Republic. In 27 BC, he was called Augustus, a title given by the Senate. Starting with Augustus, Rome changed from republic to imperial rule. The Roman Empire started. 2. The monarchical system. The Roman emperor was not elected by citizens. He held all the powers. The executive and legislative organs of the Republican period almost lost all their powers. During the late period of Roman Empire, emperors further used military power to strengthen their rule and even punished people who criticized them. Source 2.10 shows a statue of Augustus Caesar. History Extra. The disappeared dictatorial emperor. During the reign of Augustus, the Roman Empire was powerful. However, most of his successors were incapable and cruel. Nero, reigned AD 54 to 68, was a notorious tyrant in history. In AD 64, a fire broke out in Rome. After this 6-day disaster, Nero was only concerned about building his golden palace. Finally, rebellions broke out in many places. Nero lost his supporters and killed himself. His successors did not want to leave any records related to him. They ordered to destroy the statues and inscriptions of him. Study source 2.11 to learn more about the fire in Rome. The Romans believed that Nero was responsible for the fire. He could then build his golden palace on the large piece of burnt land. As for the provinces, the governors were mostly appointed by the emperors. The government carried out Romanization in the provinces, including the introduction of Roman law and construction of Roman buildings. The ancient Roman civilization thus spread widely. 3. Decline of the ancient Roman civilization. The first 200 years of the Roman Empire, 27 BC to AD 180, was called Pax Romana, meaning Roman peace. During this period, the empire was powerful, and it was the golden age of the ancient Roman civilization. In AD 395, the Roman Empire was divided into the Western and the Eastern Roman empires. In AD 476, the Western Roman Empire was overthrown by the Germanic peoples. The subsequent prolonged wars in Europe caused the classical civilization to decline. Source 2.12 shows a split of the Eastern Roman Empire and the Western Roman Empire, AD 395. Guiding questions. How did the classical civilization develop? What are its main characteristics? What legacy has it left us? B. Legacy and significance of classical civilization. 1. Forms of governance. A. Ancient Greece. 1. Spartan oligarchy. Oligarchy means rule by a small group of people in ancient Greek. Around the 8th century BC, Sparta turned into oligarchy. There were still kings, but the Council of Elders got the highest power. See the diagram below. The elders in Sparta were chosen from nobles, the minority of the population. Compared with monarchy, oligarchy could avoid absolute rulers. This system was adopted and improved by later generations. The Roman Republic was an example. Spartan oligarchy, ruled by a few nobles. The Assembly. It was formed by Spartan citizens. They elected the elders and the 5 ephors. The assembly voted on the bills proposed by the Council of Elders. However, it had no right to discuss the bills. Ephors. There were 5 overseers. All citizens were eligible to run in the election. They supervised the kings and helped run the government. Council of Elders. There were 30 members. Apart from the 2 kings, it consisted of 28 elders chosen from nobles aged over 60. The council could withdraw and resubmit the bills again, meaning that the assembly could not reject any bills. 2. Athenian democracy. Democracy means rule by the people in ancient Greek. In the 6th century BC, the Athenians set up a democratic government. The assembly was the decision-making body. All citizens, regardless of wealth, could join the assembly and vote, included secret ballot, on bills. They could also be elected as officials by lots. Although only citizens could take part in governance, Athenian democracy was the most open political system in ancient Greece. Today, the political systems of many countries learn from the Athenian democratic system of public participation and secret ballot. Athenian democracy, rule by all citizens. Council. This consisted of 500 citizens with 50 from each of the 10 tribes. It drafted bills for the assembly to vote on. The assembly, formed by all Athenian citizens. The assembly could discuss, vote to accept or reject the bills proposed by the council. Officials. They were chosen by lots from among the citizens. They served no longer than 1 year. They had to report on their work to the citizens at the end of the year. People's Court. 6,000 jurors were chosen from among the citizens by lots. Each group, formed by 600 jurors, would be in charge of a court. B. Ancient Rome. 1. The Republican system. At first, the ruling power was in the hands of the patricians. Later, the plebeians could also take part in governance through their tribunes and consuls. Since then, the government of the Roman Republic had consisted of the elements of both oligarchy and democracy. Element of oligarchy. The consuls and senators only came from a small group of patricians until the 5th century BC. Element of democracy. From the 4th century BC onwards, tribunes were elected to represent the plebeians in the Senate. They could veto bills which were against the will of the plebeians. Consuls chosen from the plebeians also reflected the increasing power of the majority. Roman Republican system, oligarchy and democracy. Executive. Formed by the patricians at first, the plebeians joined later. Consuls. There were 2 consuls. One of them must be a plebeian. Senate. There were 600 senators, mainly patricians. It also included the tribunes who were representatives of the plebeians. Legislative. Formed by all male citizens, patricians and plebeians. The Assembly. It was formed by male Roman citizens. It elected officials and voted on bills. The Roman Republic had 2 consuls as rulers. They were elected by all male citizens, not hereditary. The 2 consuls also checked and balanced each other. This prevented the rise of absolute rule. Besides, the element of democracy protected the right of plebeians. It was a very progressive political system at that time. The idea of republic, which is a state ruled by the people, spread with the expansion of the Roman Republic. Its influence continues today. Many modern countries still adopt the republican system. Study source 2.13 to learn more about the influence of the Roman Republic. In the 18th century, the French Revolution and the American Revolution overthrew absolute rule and set up a republican system. See topics 5 and 7 for more information about these 2 revolutions. History decoded. Citizens, commoners, and nobles in ancient Greece and Rome. In ancient Greco-Roman history, the meanings and rights of citizen, commoner, plebeian, and noble, patrician, were different. Citizens in ancient Greece and Rome. For example, in ancient Greece, only free adult men who were born and lived in the city-states were citizens. In ancient Rome, free adult men and women living in the empire were citizens after AD 212. However, women did not have the right to vote or to take part in politics. Commoners and nobles in ancient Greece and Rome. The ancient Greco-Roman citizens could be divided into commoners, plebeians, and nobles, patricians. Nobles were only a minority of the population, but they enjoyed a higher status than the commoners. In ancient Greece, Sparta was in fact ruled by the nobles, while Athens was ruled by the citizens. As for ancient Rome, the plebeians shared the power with the patricians during the Roman Republic. However, both of them lost their power to the emperor during the Roman Empire. See page 100. Citizens in ancient Greece were free adult men who were born in and lived in the city-states, including nobles and commoners. The following people were not citizens in ancient Greece, such as adult women, children, slaves, and foreigners. Citizens in ancient Rome, after AD 212, were free adult men and women living in the empire, including patricians and plebeians. The following people were not citizens in ancient Rome, such as children and slaves. 2. Imperial system. During the period of the Roman Empire, the Roman emperor was an absolute ruler who held all executive, military, and judicial powers. He was above all government organs. With regard to local administration, the Roman emperors improved the provincial system and appointed governors to rule for them. This maintained the stability of the conquered regions as well as the empire. The Roman system of administrative centralization has become an important model for later reference. In many modern states, the central government holds supreme power, and local governments get their power to rule from the central government. Roman imperial system. Emperor's absolute rule. Emperor. Final decision maker. He was above the Senate and Assembly. Highest commander. He led the national army and had a royal guard. Highest judge. He had the highest judicial power in all cases against citizens. Army. The army was formed by full-time soldiers. Governors also had armies of their own. Governor. Governors helped the emperor to rule the provinces. They also collected taxes and handed them over to the central government. Senate and the Assembly. They had lost much of their power. Provinces. Provinces could keep local customs, languages, and so on. However, they had to follow the Roman system and law. Most governors were Romans. They brought the Roman civilization, such as urban buildings and art, to the provinces. Roman citizens enjoyed political rights and a higher social status. Residents of the provinces wanted to become Roman citizens. Source 2.14 shows major political systems in classical civilization in terms of form of governance, main features, center of power, and political participation of citizens. Study Source 2.15 to learn more about the Roman army. The Roman army was formed by well-trained soldiers. It contributed greatly to the founding of the Roman Empire. With the provincial system, the large empire was able to last for several centuries. 2. Law. A. Ancient Greece. The early ancient Greek law was not clearly stated and written down. The nobles held all political power and enforced the law at will. In the 6th century BC, Athens carried out legal reforms to protect civil rights. In Athens, all people would be tried by a public court. Jurors would be chosen from different classes. This ensured the fairness of the trial. The Athenians placed great value on civil rights and law. The Romans learned their idea of the rule of law from the Athenians. Many modern countries adopt the jury system, which makes the legal system more open and just. Study Source 2.16 to learn more about the influence of ancient Greek law on today's mode of trial. Today, the mode of trial in most countries, especially the jury system, originates in ancient Greece. History Extra. A blindfolded goddess? The ancient Greek law had great influence on later ages. The ancient Greek goddess of justice and law, Themis, even became the symbol of the rule of law. Themis has a clear image. She holds a pair of scales, the symbol of fair trial in one hand, a sword, the symbol of power to punish criminals in the other hand. She is blindfolded, which represents the spirit of the rule of law, fairness. Source 2.17 shows a bronze statue of Themis in Europe, left, and the statue of Themis on the building of Hong Kong Court of Final Appeal. B. Ancient Rome. The Romans made the Law of the 12 Tables with reference to the ancient Greek law. Since then, the Roman law was improved continuously. This laid the foundation of the rule of law. Roman law also stressed the natural rights of citizens. These rights could not be taken away by the government. Citizens were equal before the law. They had the right to a fair trial and to appeal. The concepts of natural rights and equality in the Roman law greatly influenced the law of later generations. The spirit of Roman law was inherited by modern Western law codes, such as the Civil Code of the French and the German Civil Code, which continue till now. Many Latin legal terms are still used by many countries. 3. Creation of culture. A. Greek mythology. 1. Ancient Greek gods and heroes. The ancient Greeks worshipped many gods and goddesses. They believed that there were 12 major gods who lived on Mount Olympus. They had human feelings and often behaved like humans. Zeus was the head of the gods. The ancient Greek heroes were half god and half man. They had great strength and wisdom. Source 2.18 shows the 12 gods and goddesses of Mount Olympus. The ancient Greeks built temples to worship different gods. They also made offerings and sought instructions from them. 2. Literature and drama. The ancient Greek myths provided European literature and drama with abundant themes. The Iliad and the Odyssey of Homer, which recorded the myths, are classics of European literature. The famous dramas Oedipus Rex and the Prometheus are related to Greek mythology. They are still very popular today. 3. Languages. Greek mythology influenced the development of European languages as well. Many modern English words come from Greek myths. The English words chaos, hygiene, and music are famous examples. They come from the names of related Greek gods. Source 2.19 shows a painting of the blind poet Homer. His Iliad and Odyssey contain many legends and stories about heroes. History Extra. A fatal heel? Achilles was an ancient Greek hero. According to the Iliad, his mother dipped him into the river of hatred after his birth. However, his heel was gripped by his mother and had not been dipped. As a result, Achilles was invulnerable everywhere but there, his heel. Achilles later joined the Trojan War. He was unbeatable. According to later legends, Achilles' heel, the only vulnerable part of his body, was wounded by an arrow and he died. Today, the tendon at the back of the lower leg is known as Achilles' heel. It also means a fatal wound in English. Source 2.20 shows Achilles' tendon, red, above, and a statue of Achilles wounded by an arrow, below. 4. The Olympic Games. The most famous ancient Greek event, the Olympic Games, was also related to myths. It was held to honor Zeus. The Greek city-states would stop fighting during the Games so that athletes could reach the arena and join the Games. In 1896, the first modern Olympic Games were held in Athens. The modern Olympic Games followed the traditions of the ancient Olympic Games. They are also held every 4 years, but in different countries. Source 2.21 shows the logo of the modern Olympic Games. History in depth. The ancient Olympic Games. At first, besides Olympia, other city-states also held similar games. In about 776 BC, the Greek city-states joined together to hold the games in Olympia. The scale of the games became larger. The ancient Olympic Games were held in summer and lasted 5 days. The first 2 days were for worshipping the gods. The third and fourth days were for holding the competitions. The last day was for holding the awards-giving ceremony and celebrations. Winners received a crown made from olive leaves and were seen as heroes in their city-states. The ancient Olympic Games included short and long-distance running, long jump, javelin throw, discus throw, wrestling, and pentathlon. Though some of these events are still part of the Olympic Games today, the form of competition is different. For example, today the long jumpers do not need to hold 2 dumbbells during the competition. Source 2.22 shows an athlete above and sprinters below in the ancient Olympic Games. Sprinters had to wear a helmet and hold a round shield in the short distance running. B. Philosophy. Philosophy comes from a Greek word meaning the love of wisdom. Ancient Greek thinkers inquired into different aspects of life, for example, politics, how to rule a city-state, morality, how to have high moral values, and the universe. They asked many questions and tried to find the answers through methods such as rational argument. This gave birth to Western philosophy. Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, known as the 3 Greek sages of philosophy, were regarded as the founders of Western philosophy. Today, many scholars still study their philosophical ideas. Study source 2.23 for an introduction to the major ideas of the 3 Greek sages of philosophy, in terms of their major areas of study and major ideas. As comics say. Main points of the comics. What is the spirit of philosophy? Birth of Greek scholars. 1. The ancient Greeks loved to observe the universe and to think about the origins of human beings. Later, some scholars started to think about the ideal government for the city-states. 2. The Athenian Socrates was the founder of philosophy. He always discussed his ideas with people. 3. Athenian officials were dissatisfied with Socrates. He was sentenced to death. 4. Later, Plato, a student of Socrates, set up an academy in Athens. It encouraged freedom in learning. Many famous scholars studied there. 5. Aristotle was one of the best students in the academy. He always debated with Plato. 6. Greek scholars applied their spirit of inquiry and philosophy to other subjects. This encouraged the development of astronomy, mathematics, and physics. C. Sculpture. 1. Ancient Greece. The ancient Greeks used bronze and marble to make statues. Their themes were mainly centered on worship activities, myths, and athletes. Greek sculptures emphasized showing the ideal proportion of the human body, as well as lifelike personality and body movements. They deeply influenced the development of Western sculpture later on. 2. Ancient Rome. The ancient Roman style was relatively realistic. The statues were realistic figures such as emperors and nobles. Ancient Roman sculptures emphasized showing the real image of mortals and paid attention to details. They also had a great impact on the development of Western art. History in depth. Great differences between Greeks and Romans. Greece, the ideal perfect body. The ancient Greeks believed that exercises could build a perfect human body. Even the gods would admire it. Therefore, most ancient Greek statues worked to show the beauty of the human body. This reflected artists' ideal perfect human body at the time. Rome. Realistic personality. Ancient Roman art was more realistic. Roman artists not only stressed realistic appearance, but also showed the distinctive personality and characteristics of the figures. They were good at the realistic representation of facial and eye expressions. Source 2.24 shows the statue of the ancient Greek hero Heracles above, which shows the strong muscles of men. The statue of the ancient Roman emperor Caracalla below is famous for its frowning face. D. Architecture. 1. Ancient Greece. Ancient Greek buildings had great artistic value. Important buildings, such as temples, were surrounded by tall stone columns. The capitals, tops, of the columns were carved with beautiful patterns. The Doric order, Ionic order, and Corinthian order. Pediments were commonly found at the top of ancient Greek buildings. These basic elements of Greek architecture have been adopted by architects for centuries. Source 2.25 shows the capital of a Corinthian column decorated with carvings of leaves. Source 2.26 shows the Parthenon in Athens. The Parthenon in Athens was built in the 5th century BC. It was used to worship Athena, the guardian of Athens. 2. Ancient Rome. The ancient Roman cities were well planned. They had a huge road network linking Rome and other provinces. A good water supply and sewerage system was supported by the construction of aqueducts and pipelines. The Romans also built various facilities such as temples, forums, theaters, stadiums, and bathhouses. The Roman forums were open spaces between buildings. They were used to hold political, religious, and commercial events. Colonnades, row of columns, were built around a forum. This design is often seen in later European architecture. Today, the concept of forum is still widely used in city planning. Source 2.27 shows the remains of an ancient Roman aqueduct. It was used to transport water to cities for drinking. Source 2.28 shows the remains of the Roman Forum. The Roman Forum was built in the 7th century BC. The remains of the Roman Forum, page 112 to 113, show the architectural features of ancient Rome. History in depth. The Colosseum. The Colosseum was a famous building in ancient Rome. It was built in the 1st century AD. It was oval in shape and built of stone and cement. It had 60 rows of seats and could house about 100,000 spectators. It was mainly used to stage gladiator fights. The Colosseum shows the talents and genius of Roman architecture. Inside there were many columns and arches. Each arch had an exit allowing spectators to leave as soon as the program ended. Originally, there was also a retractable roof to keep out wind and rain. Hundreds of people were needed to operate the roof. The table on pages 114 and 115 show the legacy of classical civilization of Europe and its meaning in terms of forms of governance, law, and creation of culture. Guiding questions. What were the main characteristics of medieval feudal society? How was Christendom formed in medieval Europe? What were the roles of the Church at that time? C. Medieval Europe and the making of Christendom. 1. Europe entered medieval times. The fall of the Western Roman Empire marked the end of ancient times. Europe entered medieval times. It ended when the Eastern Roman Empire fell in AD 1453. During early medieval times, wars were frequent in Western Europe. The classical civilization declined. Later, countries introduced the feudal system. Christianity further spread. The feudal society and Christendom gradually formed. At the same time, the European civilization started to develop again. History in depth. The Dark Ages. Soon after the fall of the Western Roman Empire, prolonged wars broke out on its former territories. The classical civilization declined. With the start of the Renaissance in the 14th century, scholars then regarded the civilization of Europe might have regressed since AD 476. They thus called the period after AD 476 the Dark Ages. Many modern scholars believe that the above view ignored the development and achievements of the late medieval times. Today, the term Dark Ages is mainly used to describe the early medieval times, AD 476 to 800. Study source 2.29 to learn more about the Dark Ages. Wars were frequent during early medieval times. People lived a hard life. It was one of the darkest periods in European history. 2. Rise and characteristics of the feudal society. A. Rise of the feudal system. After the fall of the Western Roman Empire, Western Europe was divided into different kingdoms. Source 2.31. To strengthen their rule, kings gave lands to nobles in return for their loyalty. The feudal system began and spread in Europe during the period AD 800 to 1400. B. Formation of feudal society. Under the feudal system, the overlords, upper classes, would grant land and protection to their vassals, lower classes, in return for their loyalty and services. As a result, an overlord-vassal relationship developed between all classes. This relationship, together with different forms of rule and the hereditary system, made up the medieval European feudal society. Source 2.30. Since the 4th century AD, ancient Romans mostly recruited foreigners to fight in wars, but the empire was finally overthrown by foreigners. Source 2.31 shows Europe in AD 526. Different kingdoms were founded in Western Europe. They gradually adopted the feudal system. C. Characteristics of the feudal society. 1. Rigid class structure. The medieval European society was organized into a hierarchy. The 4 classes from top to bottom were king, upper nobles, knights, lower nobles, and peasants. Social mobility was low. 2. Contractual relationship. In a feudal society, an overlord and his vassals had a contractual relationship. It stated their rights and duties towards each other. This maintained the political and social order. An overlord's duties to his vassals. An overlord had to offer protection and grant land to his vassals. Therefore, the king would grant land to the upper nobles, and the upper nobles would grant land to their knights. An overlord would also offer protection and farmland to peasants. A vassal's duties to his overlord. A vassal had to serve his overlord and be loyal to him. For upper nobles and knights, they had to swear loyalty to their overlords and support their overlords in wars. Peasants had to pay taxes to their overlords and work for them without pay. Source 2.32 shows farming in medieval times. As trade was disturbed by wars, land and peasants became the economic pillars of overlords and the feudal system. 3. Hereditary system. In medieval Europe, the king and nobles belonged to the ruling class. They enjoyed a high political and social status and had a lot of lands. After their death, their positions, titles, and lands were passed on to their heirs. Peasants could also pass on their right to use the land to their heirs. This is called the hereditary system. The hereditary system helped maintain the power and wealth of the ruling class. The contractual relationship between an overlord and his vassal could also be sustained. The hereditary system played an important role in maintaining the feudal order. Source 2.33 shows a noble swearing loyalty to a king. The noble would be granted a hereditary title, power, and land in return. 4. Manorial system. The manorial system was used by the overlords to manage their lands. The overlords built castles or houses as residence. The surrounding farmlands were provided to peasants. The manor economy was self-sufficient. Manors produced food and daily goods. Trade among them was therefore limited. Source 2.34 shows a self-sufficient manor economy, pages 120 to 121, and the 3-field system, left. Under the system, farmland in the manors would be used to grow different plants in rotation. This could restore soil fertility and increase crop yield. 5. Strong local nobles. Under the hereditary system, lords became hereditary rulers of their lands. With the manorial system, they were economically self-sufficient. Therefore, medieval local nobles had strong power. The king was the ruler of his kingdom in name only. They could not exercise power on his vassal's land. 6. Knights and chivalry. Knights were professional cavalry. In medieval Europe, a knighthood became an honorary title. People who'd received training were qualified as knights. The king and upper nobles would grant them knighthood and lands. Knights had to follow the rules of chivalry, which included loyalty, bravery, diligence, protecting the weak, and selfless sacrifice. Chivalry regulated the moral behaviors and duties of knights. It helped maintain the stability of the feudal society. Source 2.35 shows the relations between knights, upper nobles, and kings in Europe. As comics say. Main points of the comics. To become a knight, what stages did Arthur have to pass through and what skills did he have to learn? What were the rules of chivalry? Chivalry. 1. Arthur was born into a lower noble family during medieval times. His father hoped he could become a great knight. 2. At the age of 7, Arthur was sent to a noble's house as a page. He served his master and learned the manners of knights. 3. At the age of 14, Arthur was promoted to squire. He learned riding, fencing, and hunting. These were the essential skills of a knight. He would also follow his lord into battle. 4. When he turned 21, Arthur was ready to become a knight. Before he was knighted, he went to a church to pray to God and beg for forgiveness for his sins. 5. Arthur swore that he would follow the rules of chivalry before his lord. His lord tapped his sword on Arthur's shoulder. Arthur was then officially a knight. 6. Arthur met the expectations of his lord and father. He won many battles and was granted a lot of land. 7. Arthur was not complacent. He followed the rules of chivalry and hoped that these rules would continue. Historical skills. Sum up main points and state characteristics. In this chapter, we have studied the feudal society in medieval Europe. We can now use the following diagram to sum up its main points and state its characteristics. Historical facts about the feudal society. 1. The feudal society was divided into 4 classes: the king, upper nobles, knights, and peasants. 2. Overlords had to grant land and protect their vassals. Vassals had to swear loyalty and serve their overlords. 3. The king and nobles could pass on their positions, titles, and lands to their heirs after their death. 4. Knights had to follow the rules of chivalry, which included loyalty, bravery, diligence, protecting the weak, and selfless sacrifice. Characteristics of the feudal society. 1. Rigid class structure. 2. Contractual relationship. 3. Hereditary system. 4. Chivalry. From the diagram above, we can first sum up the main points from historical facts, and then use some specific terms to state their characteristics. This can help us concisely and clearly express the relevant facts. 3. Legacy and significance of medieval European civilization. A. Contractual spirit and constitution. Both overlords and vassals valued their feudal rights and duties in their contractual relationship. The contractual spirit became a social norm. In 1215, English nobles were dissatisfied with their king. They forced the king to sign Magna Carta in order to protect their exploited rights. Magna Carta upheld the contractual spirit. It stated that the king should recognize the rights of his people while the people should obey him. Magna Carta is regarded as the forerunner of modern constitutions. For example, the Constitution of the United States made reference to Magna Carta. Nowadays, most countries implement constitutions. They are made to maintain social order based on the contractual spirit. Source 2.36 shows the signing of Magna Carta in 1215. The English king was forced to give up some of his power and obey the law. B. Rise of towns. In late medieval times, some craftsmen and merchants started to live outside manors. They provided services and started trading. Old towns revived and new towns also developed. Towns were owned by feudal lords. Townspeople still had to pay taxes. However, the social status of the townspeople was mostly decided by wealth rather than by birth. Some merchants paid to get a charter from their lords. They got a certain amount of autonomy, such as electing mayors and setting up courts. Life in towns freed Europeans from the feudal society. More and more Europeans were attracted to live there. Medieval times became an important stage in European urbanization. Medieval craftsmen and merchants had greater influence in towns compared with the period before. They even got a dominant position. This basic feature of city continues up till now. Source 2.37 shows a modern recreation of medieval townspeople. Source 2.38 shows an artist's impression of a medieval town, pages 126 to 127, and a medieval town above in Germany nowadays. Many European cities still keep their historical features to attract tourists. History in depth. Rise of merchants in European cities. From ancient Rome to early medieval times. Owing to the well-developed transport links, trade among different towns was active during the period of the Roman Empire. When the empire fell, towns and trade routes were seriously damaged by wars. Trade among European towns declined. When medieval times started, many people fled to manors and became peasants. The manor economy was self-sufficient. Trade was inactive among manors. The importance of European merchants dropped greatly. Late medieval times. During late medieval times, commercial activities in towns revived. Merchants formed guilds to protect their interests. Guilds set regulations on prices and wages, making merchants able to control the town's economy. Some merchants increased their political influence in towns with their economic strength. The Medici family in Florence was an example. Source 2.39 shows a statue of a member of the Medici family. During late medieval times, some members of the Medici family became rich merchants, mayors, and popes. C. Rise of universities. During early medieval times, education was strictly controlled by the church. Church schools mainly taught religious knowledge. See page 142. Later, more townspeople pursued knowledge other than religious aspect. They started to study in some newly built schools. This gave rise to many universities in Europe since the 12th century. Besides religious knowledge, these universities also taught medicine, law, and philosophy, and so on. Since medieval times, universities have become the symbol of higher education. Modern universities provide more diverse subjects. Present-day degree system, bachelor, master, and doctor, and academic dress are important traditions inherited from medieval times. Source 2.40 shows the major subjects above taught at medieval universities and the main building of the University of Bologna, bottom, in Italy nowadays. The University of Bologna is the oldest university in Europe. History extended. Civilization and living. Life in medieval Europe. 1. Kings and upper nobles. Kings and upper nobles had a lot of spare time. They would hold feasts and balls in their castles. They also liked hunting in their hunting fields. In addition, playing chess and watching acrobatics and tournaments were the favorite pastimes of this privileged class. Political system of medieval times. Castle. Feudal overlords built strong castles and manors with defense capacity. Castles were mainly built on hilltops. Some castles were built near the coast. Large amounts of weapons and food were stored in the castles. This allowed an army to station there over years. Knights. Knights mainly lived in manor houses. To practice their fighting skills and train their bodies, knights fought in mock battles called tournaments. Jousting was also a popular martial game, often performed as part of tournaments. There were other contests, such as archery and boxing contests. After these contests, a feast would be held. Peasants on manors. Peasants could only take some rest during Christian festivals. They did not have spare time to study or enjoy themselves. Most peasants were serfs. They were owned by their overlords and did not have any freedom. Overlords could sell their land together with the serfs. Serfs could not leave a manor without their overlord's permission. History extended. Civilization and living. Life in medieval Europe. 2. Clergy. The Pope and other clergymen dedicated their lives to God and the Church. Apart from preaching, bishops and priests held masses, performed marriage ceremonies, and heard confessions at churches. They also taught in church schools, and provided social services such as taking care of the elderly, treating patients, and so on. Religious symbol of medieval times. Church. All manors and towns in medieval Europe had churches as symbolic buildings. Some towns even competed to build great churches to show their respect and support. Medieval Europeans gathered at churches not only for religious activities. They also held meetings there and traded in front of the churches. Townspeople. Townspeople enjoyed more freedom. Most of them were merchants and craftsmen. They had more time to receive education and for leisure. As a result, more and more Europeans chose to live in towns. Towns became very crowded. In addition, townspeople poured sewage and threw rubbish anywhere. The living conditions in towns were unpleasant. Economic symbol of medieval times. Fair and market. Medieval kings and upper nobles approved the setting up of irregular fairs on their lands. At first, these fairs were held for peasants to exchange crops for handicrafts. Later, more products and even performances were provided in fairs. Later, permanent markets emerged in town squares. 4. The making of Christendom. A. Birth of Christianity. Christianity was founded by Jesus Christ in the 1st century AD. Jesus was born into a Jewish family in Palestine, ruled by the Roman Empire then. According to the Bible, he went to preach in Jerusalem at the age of 30. He stated that those who believed in God, the one true God, could be saved. Many people in Jerusalem became followers of Jesus. They called him Christ, meaning the Savior. His followers were known as Christians. His 12 primary disciples were called the 12 Apostles. Source 2.41 shows the Roman Empire in AD 1. History Extra. When was Jesus born? People believe that Jesus was born in AD 1. In fact, the Bible does not state Jesus' exact date of birth. It only says that he was born when King Herod was in power. According to historical studies, Herod died in 4 BC. This means that Jesus was born before 4 BC, not in AD 1. Later, Pope Julius I made December 25th Jesus' birthday in AD 350. Since then, people celebrate the birth of Jesus on this day. This becomes modern-day Christmas. Source 2.42 shows a modern recreation of the birth of Jesus in a stable. Jewish religious leaders were discontented with Jesus and Christianity. The Roman governor was also worried that Jesus might ask the Jews to rebel against Roman rule. Finally, Jesus was arrested and crucified at the age of 33. According to the Bible, Jesus rose from the dead on the 3rd day after his death and rose to heaven. B. Christian teachings. 1. Believing in God and redemption. Christianity teaches people to believe in God as the one true God. Christians believe that people sin. To be saved, people must believe in redemption through God and Jesus. 2. Preaching peace and love. Christianity teaches people to love one another and to forgive their enemies. It also teaches people that life should be treasured. 3. Spreading Christianity. Christians consider preaching and spreading Christianity as their duty because Jesus told his disciples to do so before he rose to heaven. Source 2.43 shows an artist's impression of the crucifixion of Jesus. Crucifixion was very cruel. The crucified people suffered great pain before they died. Christians use the cross as their religious symbol to commemorate Jesus. C. Development of Christianity in the Roman Empire. 1. Ban on Christianity. From AD 45, St. Paul spread Christianity in the Roman Empire. However, Christians were persecuted by the government as they did not worship Roman gods and the emperor. Christianity was even outlawed. Christians could only perform religious ceremonies in secret. 2. Christianity became the official religion. In AD 313, Roman Emperor Constantine I stopped persecuting Christians and gave people religious freedom. Christianity developed legally again. Later, Constantine I became a Christian. In AD 380, Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire. The number of followers further increased. Source 2.44 shows a picture of St. Paul. Study source 2.45 to learn more about Christianity in the Roman Empire. Early Christians were persecuted by the Roman government. Some of them were sent to the Colosseum to fight against beasts to entertain the Romans. D. Development in medieval times. 1. Split in Christianity. After the split of the Roman Empire in AD 395, the Christian Church also split into the Eastern Church, Constantinople, and the Western Church, Rome. In AD 1054, it officially split into the Roman Catholic Church and the Eastern Orthodox Church. This incident was known as the Great Schism. 2. Formation of Christendom. In spite of the Great Schism, Christianity gradually became the official religion of the feudal kingdoms. Charlemagne built a large empire in Western Europe. He encouraged people to follow Christianity. With the spread of Christianity, Christendom emerged in Europe. The influence of the Roman Catholic Church increased continuously. Source 2.46 shows the coronation of Charlemagne by the Pope, above. Christianity spread widely with the expansion of Charlemagne's empire, below. History in focus. Rise of the Roman Catholic Church. After the death of Jesus, St. Peter set up the Christian Church. Since the 4th century AD, Christianity had developed steadily in Europe. With the spread of Christianity, the Roman Catholic Church became very powerful in Western Europe. 1. AD 395. Formation of Eastern and Western churches. The Western Church was led by the Pope in Rome, while the Eastern Church was led by the Patriarch of Constantinople. They had differences with regard to teachings, rituals, and leadership. 2. Late 6th century AD. Spread to foreign tribes in Western Europe. Pope St. Gregory I actively spread Christianity to different tribes. The influence of the Roman Catholic Church in Western Europe became stronger. 3. AD 754. Formation of the Papal States. Pippin III, King of the Franks, gave Rome and the surrounding land to the Pope. The Papal States was then established in central Italy. 4. AD 768 to 814. Support of Charlemagne. Charlemagne controlled nearly the whole Western Europe. He encouraged his people to follow Christianity. He also supported the Roman Catholic Church to preach in the newly conquered regions. 5. AD 962. Agreement between the Pope and the Emperor. In AD 962, Otto I founded the Holy Roman Empire in Central Europe. He reached an agreement with the Roman Catholic Church. He recognized the Pope's control over the Papal States. In return, the Pope accepted his appointment and dismissal. 6. AD 1075. Confrontation between the Pope and the Emperor. A serious conflict broke out between Pope St. Gregory VII and Holy Roman Emperor Henry IV. Gregory VII even excommunicated Henry IV, see page 140, showing that the Pope was above the Emperor. The priesthood is the sun, the kingdom is the moon. Kings rule over their respective kingdoms, but St. Peter rules over the whole earth. Pope Innocent III's reigned AD 1198 to 1216, famous statement. Think about it. What did Innocent III use to refer to the priesthood and the kingdom? Which one had greater power? 3. Influence of the Church. The medieval church had a very high position among Europeans and influenced their every aspect of life. The Pope was the leader of the church. Medieval Europeans believed that he was God's representative on earth. Everyone, including the king, had to obey him. The Pope could excommunicate the king and nobles if they disobeyed his orders. The church was wealthy, as it owned a lot of farmland and collected taxes from people. Besides, it made laws and set up its own courts. Source 2.47 shows a cartoon about a priest collecting taxes from people in medieval Europe. History headline. The Pope won. Frozen Henry begged forgiveness. January 28, 1077. Pope and Emperor deposed each other. In AD 1077, the issue of the appointment of clergymen brought Pope St. Gregory VII into conflict with Emperor Henry IV. Henry IV then refused to recognize St. Gregory VII as Pope. St. Gregory VII excommunicated him for revenge. Road to Canossa. The excommunication scared Henry IV, as he would lose the support of his people, who were mainly Christians. Therefore, the emperor decided to beg for the Pope's forgiveness. He walked to the castle of Canossa barefoot in the snow. After standing outside the castle for 3 days, St. Gregory VII finally forgave Henry IV. They were finally reconciled with each other. 4. Functions of the Church. The medieval church helped stabilize the European society. It also had great contributions to the preservation and development of European civilization. Acquiring great political power. Kings had to be crowned by the Pope in order to gain the support of Christians. The Pope and bishops acted as advisors to the king. The Pope used his power to settle disputes and mediate wars. This helped maintain political stability in Europe. Making and enforcing laws. The Church made the canon law. It also set up courts in different places. In addition, it carried out campaigns to stop nobles from exploiting commoners. All these helped maintain law and order. Source 2.48 shows Charlemagne and his clergy advisors, below, and the Pope officiating at a noble's wedding, right. They showed the Church was related to the life of medieval Europeans in many aspects. Social services. The Church provided many social services, such as looking after the elderly and children, treating patients, and building roads and bridges. Education. The church set up a lot of church schools. They taught Latin and religion-related knowledge. For example, rhetoric taught the meaning of the Bible, while mathematics taught the calculation of religious festivals. Cultural inheritance. Medieval monks copied ancient texts and classics in monasteries. This preserved classical civilization for Europeans to study. In late medieval times, Europeans developed modern European civilization based on classical civilization. Source 2.49 shows a medieval monk copying religious texts. Source 2.50 shows the library of a medieval monastery, below, and a medical classic kept in the library, left. Historical skills. Role. Roles refer to the functions or positions of someone or something in a given area. When we answer a question about roles, we should analyze the question carefully to meet its requirements. Example: what roles did the church play in medieval times in cultural aspect? In the above case, we should focus on the church in medieval times, rather than the church in ancient times or nobles in medieval times. The discussion should also be limited to the cultural aspect. We do not have to state the roles of the church in social and political aspects. Then we can point out the cultural roles of the church as follows. The cultural work of the church in medieval times. The church built schools to teach Latin and religion-related knowledge. The church had the role of education provider. Monks copied ancient texts and classics. This preserved classical civilization. The church had the role of culture inheritor. 5. End of medieval times. From the 14th century, the influence of the church and feudalism declined gradually. Finally, medieval times ended in the 15th century. Europe entered modern times. See the timeline on page 116. A. Decline of feudalism. With the rise of towns, more and more peasants left the manors and settled in towns. During the mid-14th century, the Black Death killed many Europeans. The laborers available for the manors decreased further. This weakened the manorial system, which was a pillar of feudalism. Moreover, strong European kings rose in the late medieval period. They set up strong governments to rule the people directly. They also had powerful standing armies. The kings no longer gave lands to nobles in return for military support. The contractual relationship between kings and nobles changed. It sped up the fall of feudalism. Source 2.51 shows King Louis XI, left, of France, who was a strong king in late medieval times. He fought against nobles and got back their land. History in depth. The Black Death. During the period AD 1347 to 1353, a plague called the Black Death spread across Europe. It was spread by fleas living on rats. People infected would die within a short period of time. The plague was named the Black Death because the dead bodies of the infected would turn black. Europeans at the time believed that it was the work of death or God's punishment. As they did not know the real cause of the plague, the Black Death killed about 1/3 of the European population within 10 years. The situation was more severe in towns due to its high population density. Source 2.52 shows the protective clothing and mask worn by beak doctors during the Black Death, above, and a Black Death patient from illness to death, below. Source 2.53 shows paintings showing effects of the Black Death at the time. B. Decline of church influence. In late medieval times, the church's strict control over education was broken up by universities. With the spread of more advanced civilization from Asian Arabs at the same time, Europeans acquired new knowledge and views different from church teachings. This weakened church influence on people's minds. At the same time, the church lost power after the failure of the Crusades. Some strong European kings refused to pay taxes to the church and disobeyed the Pope openly. This constantly weakened the authority and political influence of the church. C. Fall of the Eastern Roman Empire. In AD 476, the Western Roman Empire fell. The Eastern Roman Empire continued. It was conquered by the Ottoman Turks in 1453. Historians use this incident to mark the end of medieval times. Source 2.54 shows an oil painting about the fall of Constantinople.